All right, welcome to the Two Sons Podcast. Hope you guys are all having a great week. We are doing a deep dive summary. Remember, when it comes to these books, like for those of you guys who are too busy to stop whatever you're doing and read a Star Wars book that goes into legends and 3,000 years into the past, we are going to summarize and react to Revan, an Old Republic novel. There were two Old Republic novels that I really enjoyed. This one, and then the one that centered around Darth Malgus, and who's the guy who like crashes his ship into the Jedi Temple during that CGI trailer you guys saw for the Old Republic games.
Those are so good.
I want to start big picture before we get into the book, because we are going to summarize the book. But like, this legend stuff is interesting to me, and like I understand why Disney is kind of operating from a clean slate here. So as far as Disney is concerned, there's something vague referred to as the Sith Wars that took place 1,000 years before the Phantom Menace. Maybe they'll explain that in more detail in the Acolyte. We'll see. Like I said, that's what I'd love to see from conversations between Sith Lords, is like mentions of the past, so that like kind of sets a loose framework for
the telling
of
tales.
Stuff. Yeah, because that's what you would do. It's no different than like if I was passing on a Sith lineage from one guy to the next.
Right.
I would eventually be like, hey, let me tell you about this master 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years ago, whatever it is. And so like but I understand why they why they're kind of keeping it vague, but I hope they define it a little bit. That said, like one of the things that plagues the Legends universe is the video game universe. Like the perpetual need to make sequels. So for instance, like the Old Republic was Knights of the Old Republic was a very successful video game, one of the most successful video games of all time. And so they made a sequel, Knights of the Old Republic 2. And then they made another video game called The Old Republic. So like, and so as a result, like there are 4 different times over the course of like a 300-year span where like Revan and Malak push the galaxy to their knees. And then it's like Malak pushes the galaxy to its knees. And then it's like, after that, it's like there's a Knights of the Old Republic 2 where I'm not going to get into all the details, but once again, like all the Jedi almost go extinct. And then it's like, then in the Old Republic, it's like the Jedi have to run back to Tython, to their roots, after the Jedi Temple is destroyed on Coruscant. And so like, it gets like super.
There's like always something catastrophic happening
because it needs, for the purpose of the game, you had to draw the same stakes. Like for instance, like if Knights of the Old Republic is going to have like a major galaxy defining conflict, Knights of the Old Republic 2 can't be a side quest. It's got to also be something profoundly important. And so like, while I appreciate all the stories and we're going to get into them, like I'm excited for Disney to kind of take a more measured approach to kind of like defining all of that history. Because it doesn't make, like, there's this concept in the Bane books through the Ruusan reformations where Chancellor Valorum basically says to Valentine Farfalla, he basically says like, hey man, like, because you guys are here, the Sith keep coming, and like, you keep beating the Sith, but then they just keep coming. Like,
the whole entire galaxy is getting caught in the crosshair of the Jedi Sith battle. Yeah.
Exactly. He basically is saying like we are like in the crossfire. We're collateral damage to you guys just constantly trying to kill each other.
Right.
Yeah. And so he basically, that's what leads to the Ruusan reformations, which is where the Jedi become demilitarized, the Army of Light gets disbanded, and the Jedi become more counselors and advisors, right? And that leads into the version of the Jedi that we see in the movies, right? But like, what I find fascinating about that is like, that 300-400 year span, it was spanning all these books and movies, is like a great example. It's like trillions of people died through various conflicts. You know?
You're right. The galaxy's huge, right? Yeah. There's a lot of people that died because of it.
Exactly. Yeah. So a really quick background on Revan before we get into the book. Basically, to make a long story short, Revan was a Jedi who, again, at this point in time, the Jedi were not super involved in military conflicts in the galaxy, but the Mandalorians were invading and doing damage in the galaxy. And so Revan and his apprentice Malak ended up going off in fighting the Mandalorian Wars. And over Malachor, which we see in Rebels, there is a cataclysmic event where Revan and Malak basically end up destroying like people on both sides, but wiping out the Mandalorians and winning the conflict, right? And so from that point, the Revan and Malak go into the unknown regions to try to figure out like what happened with the Mandalorians, because it turns out the Mandalorians were actually incentivized or asked to go in and invade the galaxy by this other force, which we're going to get into. And then Revan and Malak return from the unknown regions as Sith Lords and then wage war on the entire galaxy, and it becomes this major conflict, right?
Yeah, the plot for this is so cool. Mm-hmm. Like the fact that 2 Jedi go off to learn about something and come back as Sith Lords is pretty gnarly.
Yeah, which is ominous in its own way, right? And like in that gap, wondering what happens in the unknown regions is basically the framework of this book that we're going to get into today.
Yeah.
But really quickly, to briefly summarize what happens, Malak eventually turns on Revan. They're in separate capital ships and opens fire on Revan's capital ship, while a Jedi strike team infiltrates the ship and basically takes Revan prisoner, and they wipe his memory.
Easy fix for a Sith Lord.
Easy fix, right? That ends up being the entire foundation of the Knights of the Old Republic game. You basically pick up as a Revan who doesn't know he's Revan. And essentially all you do is you slowly retrain yourself on the Force, and you eventually defeat Malak over the Rakata homeworld of, I'm blanking on what it's called right now. But you basically defeat Malak there, right? It turns out, as we find out from the Bane books, that Revan ends up actually building leaving a Sith holocron in a Rakatan temple on that planet that Bane finds, and he uses the wisdom from Revan to actually conceptualize the rule of 2, which is really, really cool, right?
It's really cool.
So anyway, Revan wins, battle's over, okay? Then while like a few years later, there's a whole other cataclysmic Sith uprising, which we're not even going to get into, right? But like basically what happens is Revan years later is having a conversation with his wife,
who's also a Jedi.
Who also is a Jedi, Bastila Shan.
Yeah.
Bastila is a badass, by the way.
She is.
And she's heavily prominent in the Knights of the Old Republic games. But basically, he has this vision, and he's very, very concerned about what happened when he went into the unknown regions. And he keeps seeing this planet with like storms that are that never end. And it ends up being Dromund Kaas, right? So he has these visions, and he goes to his wife, and he's like, I have to go find out what I saw when I was out there that turned me to the dark side. I have to know. And so Bastila like wants to come with him, but then Bastila turns out is pregnant. So Bastila decides to he decides that Bastila needs to stay. So he stays. Revan goes and he finds Canderous Ordo, who is one of the old Mandalorian guys that he worked with. It was like one of your teammates in the Knights of the Old Republic games. Did you ever play him?
No.
So in the Knights of the Old Republic game, like you'd have like a long list of like teammates, like people that were in your party, your traveling party, but I think you could only take 2 of them with you whenever you were out.
I see.
So you'd pick like 2, like there was like an assassin droid, there's like another Jedi, there's like Canderous the Mandalorian, there's like all these different people that you can bring with you. Canderous was one of those characters, right? So Canderous is a Mandalorian, and Canderous goes like, so when Revan defeated Mandalore the Ultimate, who was the guy that led the Mandalorian Wars, he hid Mandalore's mask, but he doesn't remember where he hid it. And so he goes to Canderous, and he's like, we need to find this mask, because he's like, he thinks Revan has convinced himself that if he finds this mask, it will remind him of everything that happened in his past, because that's been like blocked off, and he's right.
Yeah.
So there's this planet called Rekiad, okay?
Yeah.
And Canderous basically tells him, he's like, all the Mandalorian tribes have like partitioned off pieces of this planet, and they're like searching for this mask,
which is so Mandalorian-esque as well. Like they're all under the banner of Mandalore, but they'll do anything to like beat the other tribes. It's the Mandalorian culture is so interesting.
It's so fascinating. It's so fascinating, and we find out that they hate the Jedi because like Revan does not want to reveal who he is.
Right,
and Revan is not just a Jedi; he's
the Jedi. Yeah. He's that kind of destroyed them.
Yeah, exactly. So Canderous brings him to their clan. It turns out the clan leader is like Canderous's like ex-wife or girlfriend or something.
I think they were married. That was his wife. That was his wife.
But she like really hates Revan, so they can't reveal, right? But Canderous gets to have some sex before all the shit goes down. So good for Canderous. But like basically Revan has another vision, and he goes like, I know exactly where this mask is, and it's in another tribe's territory. And so they go to this other territory and they like wage battle against this other clan of Mandalorians and they win. And so then they find these like 2 massive ice pillars, right? And they have to climb the ice pillars. And when they get to the top and they go into the opening, it turns out it's like this ancient like Sith mausoleum temple thing that is from this ancient Sith Lord from this planet called Nathema. Okay. But he finds the mask, and when he finds the mask, he immediately remembers everything. And now he knows exactly, like, he went off to this other planet, blah, 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 okay? But then the rest of Canderous' clan turns on them. Because Revan had to reveal himself in the battle over that territory.
Yeah, Canderous' wife turns on them.
They all turn on him. Yeah. And then so Canderous and Revan had to kill all the other Mandalorians.
Dude, it's kind of sad.
Yeah.
It's pretty messed up.
Yeah, it's pretty dark. But what was kind of cool is Revan gives the mask to Canderous. And Revan basically says, like, you have to lead these people in a different direction than the way they went. And there's this really cool moment where Canderous is like, I am Mandalore the Preserver, and I will lead my people into a new age and all this kind of stuff. Kind of a cool moment in Mandalore history before they go off the rails again later on.
People have a way of doing that to ourselves, it turns out. Yeah, we're kind of a bunch of idiots, but hey.
So Revan remembers. He's like, okay, I went to this planet called Nathema, and he specifically remembers that this guy was a guy who fled Nathema because of this guy named Vitiate, right? So he goes to this planet called Nathema, right? Now we're gonna move to an entirely different storyline. The book actually kind of starts, the book bounces back and forth between these 2 storylines. But there's this Sith named Scourge, okay? And it's kind of cool because
the Sith really know how to name themselves.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And like also the Sith species, we're not going to see it in the Acolyte, but I'm very, very excited if they do go back into time to see some more like actual mentions in like live action versions of the Sith.
Right.
Because the Sith were an actual alien species. Native to Korriban, which is going to be Morabon in canon.
We'll just glance over that.
I do not know why they needed to do that.
No.
So, Morabon, but it was Korriban in the Old Republic books. And but on Korriban, like basically this species kind of intermingled with Dark Jedi who were humans, and they kind of became one species, which was the Sith. And the Sith were kind of naturally inclined to the dark side of the Force, right?
Right.
So basically, what happens is Scourge goes to Dromund Kaas because he's been employed by this Sith Lord named Darth Nihilus to help her with an investigation into who's trying to kill her, right? In that process, the book explains basically what happened with the Sith. And essentially, all that happened was the Sith Lords, under the leadership of a Lord of the Sith named Naga Sadow, invades the galaxy and has a great deal of success and actually attacks Coruscant. But he's a battle meditation guy. And so he had a sphere where he did his battle meditation, and other Sith turned on Naga Sadow and attacked his battle meditation sphere, which led to Naga Sadow's forces becoming discombobulated, and they lose in really ugly fashion.
Can you imagine, too, if you're fighting against the Sith, and then they're just kicking your ass, and then all of a sudden they just start attacking each other, and you'd be like, "Oh, okay, this is great, yeah."
It makes perfect sense why Bane was like, "Yeah, we got to do some shit."
That's the most Sith thing ever.
It's kind of like Malak attacking Revan. Mm-hmm. It's like it is one of the Dark Council trying to overthrow Lord Vitiate. Like literally, the Sith cannot help themselves. They cannot help themselves, which is why I'm excited for the Acolyte, because I hope they kind of dive into that concept a little bit, cool. Because it's super fascinating, right? So the Sith end up basically. There's a final battle at Korriban, whatever. We're gonna call it Korriban. It's a matter of principle at this point. So, and the Sith flee to the unknown regions, and the Jedi actually think that they're extinct. But
in typical
Jedi fashion, they think that they're extinct. So the Sith basically for 1,000 years build this new society out in the unknown regions under these specific auspices of this Dark Lord of the Sith, Vitiate, which we're going to explain in a second. But basically, the Sith exist in the unknown regions. Their home base is this Dromon Kaas, which is this planet that's covered with incessant storms as a result of some dark side ritual that took place a long time in the past. And the Republic is just completely separated from them. They just don't even know each other exist, basically, right? And then what's super fascinating is on this planet, this Nathema, and let's go back to Scourge for a minute. So Scourge basically talks to Darth Nihilus, and Darth Nihilus is like, yeah, these people are trying to kill me, blah, blah, blah. Like, and she sends Scourge on a few missions, and Scourge ends up going on this mission specifically to kill this Dark Lord of the Sith named Darth Zedrix. Mm-hmm. And there's this really cool scene where Scourge kills Zedrix, but what happens is like Zedrix like basically goes like, you can't beat me, blah, blah, blah. And then Scourge charges him and he like lightnings him and like just fucks up Scourge. Yes. Like just gets completely fucked up, right?
He decimates him.
And then Scourge is like, oh no, I can't beat this guy. But then like he looks up and realizes, like he senses, he like reaches out with the Force and he sees like something funky about Zedrix's body language. And then all of a sudden he's like, oh, he wasted all his power in that single attack. And so then he just goes and kills him.
Because if I remember right, Scourge thought he was being manipulated in that moment after he got attacked, right? Where he's like, oh, Nihilus just sent me here to die. And then before that, Nihilus was like, he's super weak. Like, he's past his prime. He needs to be taken care of, right?
Scourge is an interesting character because he doesn't really realize how powerful he is. Did you I found that really interesting, that scene. Do you remember the scene where like where Scourge attacked the droid factory? And he was getting his butt kicked and he was struggling. And and then tell him what Darth Nihilus says.
So it's because he was fighting droids, right? Yeah. So he relied too heavily on like the anguish of his foes. So then because of that, he was fighting droids and they weren't anguishing, I guess. And because of that, he had a really hard time battling against them. So
yeah, there's an early scene when he first shows up to Darth Nihilus's like kind of fortress where he gets attacked by these two random like mercenaries, and in it like he actually talks about how like he like drinks in the fear and like the pain and anguish, a very Sith thing, right, to give himself more power to win the battle. But then like he goes to these droids and he survives, but he kind of gets his butt kicked, and then Darth Nihilus is like, like you have to find a way to like find strength from within,
right,
rather than trying to sense it within the droids, which I thought was a really fascinating kind of thing. And Scourge is in general like very much like, he's not like an overwhelmingly arrogant Sith.
No.
Like he's kind of like unaware of his own standing in the Force. But anyway, after killing Darth Zedrix, he goes back to Darth Nihilus, and Darth Nihilus basically goes like, by the way, like we are trying to overthrow our leader, who is the Darth Vitiate, right?
Who's just an absolute powerhouse.
He's probably the most powerful Sith Lord that's ever existed. I
agree with that.
I would argue that
I totally agree with that.
I would argue Palpatine actually overthrew the Republic, so Palpatine probably wins.
I don't know. I'd love to hear our commenters on that because I think he beats Palpatine.
We need to. We're going to power through this summary real quick, and then because I want to debate that.
Okay.
But basically, to make a long story short, she goes, let me tell you the story of Darth Vitiate. And basically all it is Darth Vitiate was just a regular Sith on this planet Nathema who essentially like killed everybody on the planet in a secret ritual. Basically what he did is he kind of started backstabbing people on his planet and rose to a position of power. And when he rose to a position of power, he was still considered a much lower Sith Lord on the planet Nathema compared to all of the other Sith Lords that fought underneath Naga Sadow. And so then after Naga Sadow lost, Lord Vitiate actually brings, and I can't remember his Tenebra, I think was his name. I think he goes by Tenebra, was what he was known when he was young. So this Darth Tenebra or whatever calls, which is interesting because Darth Tenebrous is probably some sort of reference to him.
Oh, maybe.
That's Plagueis' master. But anyway, Tenebra like tricks all of the Sith Lords to coming to Nathema because he gets them to be scared of the Republic. And it's kind of like this fascinating concept where like he basically gets all the Sith Lords terrified that the Republic's going to come kill him. The Republic's going to come kill him. So they all come to his planet, and then he unleashes this ritual that just not only kills all of those other Sith Lords, but completely removes the Force from that planet.
Dude, you're making my argument for me right now about the whole entire Palpatine.
It's a pretty powerful shit.
Yeah, it really is.
But Palpatine also took all of the Kyber crystals and built a spaceship and was vaporizing planets.
Yeah, but that's all like power and empire. Like, That's pretty cunning as well. Don't get me wrong.
How is the Death Star not a Sith weapon in the same way that
it
the
totally
Starforge is? Or
you're right. It totally
you don't think Palpatine infused the Force into that shit in some way, shape, or
just
form?
doing some freaky Force stuff in the background.
Well, kyber crystals.
No, I know. No, I'm not downplaying the Death Star by any means.
He's downplaying Palpatine, the one guy who actually overthrew the Republic.
Yeah, that's true. That's
he finished the grand plan.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. But are we talking power or are we talking smarts? Or are we?
What would Darth Bane tell you?
Both.
Darth Bane would tell you that power is the simplest expression of the Force. It's actually about subterfuge.
True.
And
that's a really good point
sabotage.
Too, man. That's a really good point.
I'm just saying.
That's a good point.
So yeah, I want to get back into this.
Okay.
But so to kind of blow through this, so basically, like after he kills all of those Sith Lords, he becomes the most powerful Sith Lord by far. He also becomes immortal, and that's when he moves to Dromund Kaas and starts kind of building the new empire. And basically, like Darth Nihilus is telling Scourge, like this dude does not actually have our best interests at heart. All he really wants to do is suck the life out of us and kill us. His dream is to do that to the entire galaxy.
Right.
Like we cannot serve this guy. We need to overthrow him. Right.
The way that they're talking about what the galaxy would be like with him truly in charge of everything was like very odd. It was just void of everything.
Well, didn't it make... Yeah, it was like... It's kind of like Nathema, right? In both Nihilus and Scourge, it's almost un-Sith-like where they're like, we can't do that.
Yeah, it was like too much. Like, if there's nothing to rule over, why rule, right?
But Scourge isn't on board, so Nihilus needs to show him Nathema. So they go to Nathema, right? And basically, now we know Revan and Scourge and Nihilus are headed for Nathema, right? So they show up at Nathema, and remember, Nathema is the planet where Tenebra did that ritual that just vaporized all the Sith Lords and gave them all the power, right? So while they're on this planet, they step out of their ships. You know, Revan's like, holy shit, like this place, the Force is just gone here.
Void.
Scourge gets out, he's looking around, and like Scourge immediately becomes aware, like, I have to find a way to destroy the Emperor. This has to happen, right? Yeah. But they end up capturing Revan, right? Because Revan's there, and obviously he's dead to rights because there's 2 Sith Lords that find him. So they imprison Revan at Darth Nihilus' fortress for 4 years. And during those 4 years, Scourge repeatedly visits Revan because he's very fascinated by Revan. Revan is famous, even to the Sith, as being the one who like brought the Republic to its knees, right? Yeah. So like Revan's like weird. He's like famous. Bane like reveres Revan as a Sith, even though he becomes a Jedi at the end. Like the Jedi revere Revan as like,
and Revan just sees himself as this like average Joe.
Is Revan the most powerful Jedi of all time? That's the other question we should be asking.
I mean. You can argue that just because he did tap into the dark side.
Yeah, like he conquered both sides.
He kind of conquered both sides.
Yeah.
He kind of messed up a little
Force user of all time.
Very versatile.
Yeah. So anyway, during the time that Scourge is talking with Revan continues to lay the seeds with Scourge that they need to destroy this Emperor.
Which is funny because Scourge thinks that he's laying seeds in Revan's brain.
Exactly. They both think they're playing each other.
Yeah, they're both laying seeds on each other.
Even though they're on this,
they're both seeding each other hard.
So, anyway, and Revan sees now from Scourge and from his trip to Dromund Kaas, like he understands. Revan's aware now, like this is a huge problem. Yeah, like this whole Sith Empire out here, this is gonna come back to bite us in the ass eventually, right? So we fast forward the 4 years. This former Jedi named Mitra Surik, and she's kind of involved in the Knights of the Old Republic 2 game. It's a long story. We won't get into it. But basically, she's no longer a Jedi, but she's a very powerful Force user. She meets with Bastila. Bastila's like jealous of Mitra because Mitra and Revan have had all these journeys together, right? So essentially, Mitra goes, I'm going to go find Revan and see what happened, right? So Mitra starts doing all this research, and she eventually makes her way to Dromund Kaas and finds that they're there, right? When she gets to Dromund Kaas, she ends up having a meeting with Scourge, and in the meeting with Scourge, she basically, like, they discuss the situation. They both want to break Revan out. They both want to overthrow the Emperor. Right. A plan takes shape. Scourge goes to the Emperor's palace and rats out all the Sith Lords that are trying to turn on the Emperor. Basically says, like, your council's trying to turn on you. So when Scourge goes back to meet up with Mitra, the Emperor unleashes a coordinated attack on every single member of the Dark Council.
How many members are there
12,
at this point? 12? Okay.
So 12 of the most powerful Sith Lords in the galaxy all get killed simultaneously, right?
Right.
But there's an assault by the Emperor's troops on the Darth Nihilus' fortress, and during that process, Mitra and Scourge infiltrate, and they unlock Revan from prison. There's this really cool moment where Darth Nihilus finds them down at the prison cell and basically comes up to Revan and basically says, I'm going to kill you. And then Revan has this like dope line where he's like, I am Revan reborn, and before me, you are nothing. Because like Darth Nihilus unleashed like her resume. Do you remember that?
Yes.
Yeah, like every Sith Lord has to unleash their resume.
I know, before they do something
here's
crazy.
Here's all the dope shit I did.
Yeah. And then because Revan has his mask by then, correct?
Yeah, Revan wears
how did he get it back? Why doesn't Canderous
Revan's mask is not Mandalorian's
Oh, sorry,
mask.
Yeah,
Revan's
of course. Yeah, I'm an
this
idiot.
guy.
Yeah. That was crazy for me to experience. I thought those were the same. That actually, I'm an idiot. Continue.
So Revan wears his mask, and but yeah, Darth Nihilus like lists off her resume, and then Revan's response is like, yeah, but I'm Revan, and before me, you're nothing. And like he just basically like unleashes a force wave on her, and she just
I'm rubber, you're glue. Yeah. Everything bounced off me and sticks on you.
That's basically what happens. So then Darth Nihilus gets like obliterated, right? So then Scourge, Revan, and Mitra all march in on the Imperial Palace. They use Jedi mind tricks to get in close to the to the actual facility. I can't remember exactly how, but they end up breaking into the actual room, and there's this final confrontation with the Emperor. And during the final confrontation, like Scourge has this moment where he sees all these visions of all these different possibilities. Some of them they defeat the Emperor, some of them they lose. Like but he's not sure what's going to happen.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but that was Scourge dabbling a little bit in the light side, correct? Because they're talking about how the dark side users didn't really, at least in this area of time, they were talking about how the dark side users weren't particularly good at seeing the future, and how the light side users were. So then that was something that he was trying to learn from Revan.
Yeah, apparently. I wouldn't be surprised because like that's something I appreciated about all these books. There's a lot of gray area stuff with both sides. That's a big thing in Bane too. Remember,
even in the High Republic,
Army of Light is getting a little Sithy, and the Sith is getting a little Jedi.
Yeah.
Like, remember, Bane's like, this is some sort of twisted perversion of both sides.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's interesting. I think that might have been a part of, because Scourge ends up, to make a long story short, Scourge ends up having this other vision of the future, like the distant future, where him and this other character, which ends up being your video game character, I can't remember the exact phraseology that they use to describe him, but he has this vision of him alongside this other Jedi overthrowing the Emperor. And so then he basically turns and kills both Mitra and like stabs him. I think he stabs Mitra in the back.
He stabs Mitra in the back.
And then Revan loses to the Emperor and becomes imprisoned. And then Scourge in the back of his head goes like, this is something I need to do for a future version of this. And basically that sets the stage for the actual Old Republic game, where you end up defeating the Emperor alongside Scourge as that character.
What does Scourge get named?
The Emperor's Wrath, right?
Yeah, the Emperor's Wrath. Okay, that's what it was.
And there's this really cool scene where like basically the Emperor's like, I'm going to make you immortal. To be my Emperor's Wrath.
Right.
And so then like he like engages in this ritual with Scourge, and Scourge is just in overwhelming pain.
Yes.
But like he's like, is this pain ever gonna go away? He's like, no,
not
that's
really.
How you're immortal.
Dude, I know.
It reminded me of
the most Sith thing, like the Orbalisks.
The Obelisk, yeah, that's exactly what I thought. Like he's in overwhelming pain, but it's like he's like,
all right, I guess this works. And then the Emperor says something along the lines of like, you'll pretty much get used to it. You'll become numb to it.
Yeah. But he basically serves as like the executioner for the Emperor. And for 300 years, he faithfully does that to kind of set the stage for when he helps overthrow.
Another comp really quick, Lord Vader. That was actually some of the ways that Lord Vader continued just to do his thing and to be angry and evil all the time. His suit was super uncomfortable, and he was always in pain, so that kind of helped him continue his hatred.
Dude,
pretty cool.
I saw an Instagram reel about Vader after him like losing part of his power when he like was burned alive on Mustafar, and like that's why he wasn't able to overthrow Sidious.
Interesting.
And that's why Sidious wanted to replace him with a new apprentice, which ended up being Luke. I thought there's I won't get into it today because it's a whole rabbit hole. We could spend 20 minutes on it.
Dude, that is interesting though, because Vader lost a part of himself when Padme died.
So, okay. The only last piece that you guys need to know is Revan, while he's in prison, engages in psychological warfare with the Emperor, basically seeding doubt. More seed. just
laying seeds.
Laying seeds of
brain
doubt.
control.
Yeah, laying seeds of doubt with the Emperor, and that basically convinces him to not invade for another 300 years.
Yeah.
And that buys the Republic time to kind of like prepare for
Which is like such a beautiful thing that Revan did, but so tragic for his family. Mm-hmm. You know, like it talks
Never
about...
got to see his kids.
Never got to see his kids. Never got to like see his wife again, but like it talked about how his wife and her whole
I think his
old
kid
age...
became chancellor too, if I remember correctly.
He became a politician of sorts.
A politician of some kind, yeah.
And it's like that's like such a... That's such like a beautiful story if you really think about it. Like just like low key in this incredibly cool sci-fi book, Star Wars book. Like it actually is truly a beautiful story.
No, I totally agree. Mm-hmm. I really enjoyed this book.
Yeah, it's top notch.
And there's a Mark Thompson audiobook that you can find. Mark Thompson's excellent at it. Does the voices really well. It's very well produced with lots of with sound effects and stuff. I encourage you guys to check that out. We'll run this as a breakout because I find this fascinating, but let's get into it.
Yes. Set the stage.
Who is the most powerful Sith Lord of all time, Palpatine or Lord Vitiate?
I honestly think it's Lord Vitiate. Mm-hmm.
So what's the case?
So
just because he lived a long time?
He lived a really long time, which as a Sith Lord, that is not easy to do. He obviously had a group of very loyal followers that were not able to overthrow him for a very, very long time, which is pretty impressive for a Sith Lord to be.
I wouldn't say they were loyal, but they were like
so scared.
They were terrified of him.
Yes. He was able to decimate an entire planet and void it of the living force and anything alive just by doing a ritual. Like that's pretty badass. Whereas when we've seen other Sith Lords do that, it wasn't at that scale, and they needed way more Siths in order to be able to do that, like the Brotherhood of Darkness.
Yeah, it took like 100 of them.
Yes, exactly, and it took actually some Jedi to be there too. Apparently, you know, like what he was able to do was truly unparalleled, in my opinion.
Yeah, I would say that there's a good case that he's the most powerful of them, because like he also just wouldn't die, which is very Palpatine-esque. Like when he gets defeated, like his body, like his spirit, like teleports over to this like other character. No, just kidding. Well, because like there's this whole thing that we won't even get into, but like there's this thing called the Infinite Empire, or not the Infinite Empire. The I'm blanking on what it's called, but like there's a whole other like faction that Vitiate like teleports into and like starts running, and then there's three factions. It's like his faction, and then like the new Sith, and then the Jedi. It's like all this stuff. It takes like he gets defeated like 3 times before he actually dies forever. Yeah, like he certainly was the most powerful. But like one of the things to me Palpatine is the greatest Sith Lord of all time in terms of like overall accomplishment. And the main reason why is like he accomplished what no other Sith Lord could do. He ruled the galaxy.
I see that.
And to put it simply, like Darth Bane basically discovers like, hey, just like Scourge betrayed Vitiate at the end, like the Sith always turn on each other.
Right.
Sadao failed because they turned on each other. Revan failed. Darth Revan failed because his apprentice turned on him. We just went over all that. We're not going to get into it again. But the Sith keep turning on each other. And so Bane finally goes like, nope, we can't do it this way. We have to limit our numbers, focus all the power of the dark side in 2 individuals. You know, one Dark Lord to embody the power, another to crave it, right?
Yeah.
And then that will pass down the line. And we can't beat the Jedi through force of arms. That's the main thing. And there's a really interesting scene in the end of the first Bane book, which I appreciate, where when Bane calls in it calls to the fleet and goes like, engage the Jedi, which allows the blockade to be broken so that the Army of Light can slip those 300 Jedi through the lines. It's all part of Bane's plan, which was genius. But in that process, there's a moment where Lord Khan, the leader of the Brotherhood of Darkness, looks out on the field of battle and goes like, for a brief second, it seemed like they might have been able to turn the tide if they could have organized and fought together.
Yeah.
But instead, every Sith Lord basically went to self-preservation mode and fled the scene.
Right.
And he's like watching the Jedi like stay together and fight. And like like there's even before the reinforcements break through the line, he's like amazed at how well the Jedi are holding up just because they're fighting together. And so like that's kind of like just a basic concept where it's like the Jedi can always win through force of arms because they're self-sacrifice, loyalty, like unwavering commitment to the cause.
So I know we need to close this up, but I will say this. It feels like, and I'm not downplaying Palpatine at all. Like, obviously the dude is wicked, right? So powerful. But Palpatine had all this momentum leading up into his power. Like, there were many Sith Lords before him, starting with Bane, that had quite legitimately paved the way and sophisticated the science of Sithery, we'll say. and he just happened to be kind of in the right spot at the right time. Granted, there was a lot of manipulation that he had done.
Look at everything Plagueis did.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of good that he had done for his cause, but Lord Vitiate like truly was self-made. He was, if I remember right, he just grew up in this small little village. His dad was like a farmer, I think. And then his birth dad ended up getting his mom pregnant, right? And that's how he was conceived. And then he killed his dad, and his birth dad apparently was this badass Sith, right? He killed him and then took over an entire planet and then destroyed said planet and then literally
destroyed all the top Sith Lords too.
Yes, and then literally ran his side of the galaxy and was able to crush the most powerful Sith of the time with a single like flip of a switch all at once. Like, that's pretty impressive. Like, I've got to say, like, that's
making
pretty
a very
crazy.
good case. I think you've made the case pretty clearly that Vitiate is the most powerful Sith Lord of all time.
I see where you're.
And the case you made, you're right, because like anybody who's read the Darth Plagueis book knows, like, literally to the moment that Palpatine got elected Chancellor, Palpatine was behind, or Plagueis was behind the scenes. Like, there were many senators who just didn't show up to the vote.
Yeah.
Like, Palpatine and Plagueis pulled a lot of shady shit to get Palpatine in power. And, like, not to mention, like, them defeating their enemies, the Gran, at the time. Like, there's so much that they did. You're right. Palpatine was basically the guy that, in a relay race, who took them across the finish
he got
line.
to hit the button.
Yeah.
He did everything right to be able to hit the button.
Mm-hmm.
Like, don't get me wrong.
Yes.
Like, I do not want to downplay Palpatine at all. The dude's a badass.
Can I just say this, too? I do not factor in the sequel trilogy in Palpatine's success.
No.
It's such bullshit.
No, that is not Star Wars.
Yeah,
that is not George Lucas' Star Wars. No,
I 100% agree.
That timeline, that story was completed when Palpatine was killed. Really killed.
I 100% agree. Like, but even just within that focus, like for half a century or so, I can't remember exactly the total number of years, but for a long time, he ruled the galaxy.
He did.
Once more to sit.
Also, Palpatine was kind of this like whiny little B-word for a long time growing up. Like, truly, dude, he was kind of just a little dickhead, you know?
Well, one of the things that I find interesting about Palpatine, and they get into this in the Plagueis book, and the voice actor does an amazing job, but he's very much a politician.
Yeah, he is.
Like Plagueis to me was another guy that like was arguably one of the most powerful Sith Lords of all time. And he even identified Palpatine as basically, Plagueis knew the minute he found Palpatine, like, we're the guys who are going to finish the grand plan. Like, Plagueis knew, like, we are the ones who are going to take this across the finish line. And specifically, he pointed at Palpatine as the guy who could be in the chair.
Right, the face.
Like, that was the guy.
Of who they were.
He could, because he, like, and that's the thing is, like, and that's the beautiful thing about the way they casted Palpatine, too, is, like, that actor was so capable of nailing both sides of that coin.
Yeah.
And like, to just like how in The Phantom Menace, how like just like kind of like pompous and politician-y he was. And
pompous Palpatine politician.
But anyway, yeah, I do think it's an interesting debate. We'll have to get into Revan another time.
Yep.
All right, guys, that's all we have for today. As always, we sincerely appreciate you guys for supporting us. We will be back after the first episodes of The Acolyte to break it all down, and throughout that series. We appreciate you guys for supporting us. We'll see you guys then.
Thanks a lot.